It's an honor to have Representative Pramila Jayapal here tonight. The nation has covered Pramila Jayapal's remarkable work as a pragmatic legislator of bold vision and courage. She is always working toward a goal, as she says, to change beliefs about what is possible and then fight for how we make that tangible. I met Pramila in November 2015 at the Seattle Town Hall. She was a state senator from the 7th District and had endorsed Bernie Sanders, and she participated in the nation's 150th anniversary celebration. We asked each participant to select a reading from the nation's archives, and Pramila's was Eleanor Roosevelt's 1940 Nation Peace, Fear is the Enemy. She spoke powerfully of her work as a longtime immigrant rights organizer. And since then, I have been a great admirer, as has the nation. Elected in 2016, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal now serves her second term in Congress. And she represents, as I said, Washington's 7th District, which encompasses most of Seattle. She is the first South Asian American woman elected to the US House of Representatives. Pramila is a member of the House Judiciary Committee, the House Education and Labor and Budget Committee. She's also the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which represents approximately 40% of the entire Democratic caucus. And she is director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, whose board I am proud to serve on. And the CPCC strengthens ties between movements of our time and the extraordinary in elected power of progressive electeds. She's poised to become even more of a powerhouse in the House. With the CPC, now she is the director. And what the rules changes mean for the CPC, what that means for a more focused progressive response in these critical times, I hope we will hear from Pramila about that. And she has been at the forefront of the fight for Medicare for all, 15 minimum wage. And I think her legislation in this pandemic time has been some of the most important. The healthcare issues she's sponsored with Bernie Sanders. And then she's also championed the Paycheck Guarantee Act, which if we were wise enough, as have been many countries in Europe, we would have adopted to avert some of the joblessness we've suffered from. I wanted to point out also her extraordinary book, Use the Power You Have, A Brown Woman's Guide to Politics and Political Change. So all power. Representative Jayapal, I wanted to ask you how you came to your sense of organizing inside, because you've been on the outside, so to speak, as a movement organizer of an immigration rights organization, and you were here you were working in that organization in 9/11 when it became so mean-spirited in this country. We often forget that because George W. Bush gets a pass. But I wanted to ask how you now understand your theory of change, the ability to have inside outside as a way to move power and change in this country.
Well, Katrina, it's so good to see you. And I just want to thank you and the nation again for everything that you do. It's been really such an honor to have the wind at our sails, if you will, with everything that the nation does and all the ideas that it is putting forward and championing. So, I never thought I would be in elected office. I was an outside organizer, as you said. I was working to build power on the outside, to organize grassroots movements, formed the largest immigrant advocacy organization in Washington state, worked on $15. But what I realized is we were having to work too hard to make our ideas popular politically. We were having to work too hard to convince people that were in elected office. And there was a sense of purism, I think, from some of us in the progressive movement. We don't want to be part of the government, part of the bureaucracy. We want to be on the outside. But I realized that a whole theory of change that could really shift the policy and the consciousness of government as it exists today was for us to think about elected office as just another place to organize, another organizing platform, where if we were on the inside at the tables, as Shirley Chisholm so wisely said many, many decades ago, then we could actually be part of making the change that we wish to see. And it has been too slow in coming, in part because activists like me said, no, I'm not going to go there. Barbara Lee inspired me with her vote against the authorization of use of military force. And that was the first time I started thinking, well, maybe there are some elected officials who can use their power wisely on the inside. But that trajectory from realizing that we not only needed to engage in policy work, we needed to engage in electoral work, but then we also needed to engage on the inside and create that spirit of organizing, and also break down the silos between inside organizing and outside organizing. I haven't found the right terms for it yet, but I see what is possible when we're on the inside. We are at the tables. We can influence the conversations, and I'm so glad that we not only have the Shirley Chisholms and the Barbara Lees, the shoulders on which we stand, but also a whole generation of new activists or of activists that are now newly thinking about running for office and winning,
Yes.
joining us in the Progressive
You
Caucus.
led the way in a sense in 2016. No, because you came out of the movements, and we see that now, and it's exciting. I love the Barbara Lee story, and on your panel at the Progressive Caucus Summit, she mentioned that John Lewis, it was a panel about John Lewis, had come to her after that vote and said he had wished he had joined her, which was very moving. But your campaigns were very much movement oriented, base focused, and took the energy from the movements. How do you see that now working in so many campaigns? Because you were early. And how do you think the Democratic Party, sort of the establishment, sees that? More and more movement people coming into elected office, into down ballot other.
Well, that was early, and I was, I think, one of only 6 members or 6 candidates that ran on not taking any corporate PAC money. This was in 2016. At the time, I was really committed. Part of my theory of change was how we do the work. And I really believed that we were putting too much money into just television ads and mailers, and we needed to be door knocking. So I think in my campaign, I knocked on 120,000 doors, made over 240,000 phone calls. But that was unheard of for 2016. What I think we were able to accomplish is in 2018, in part, in a strange way, thanks to Donald Trump and all of the opposition, people ran different kinds of campaigns. They started to run field campaigns. And there were even some campaigns in swing districts that did more field organizing than even our campaign did. So I feel like that was a big win. We won the discussion in 2018 about how to run a campaign. Then comes 2020. And the reality is the in-betweens are as important as the election, the 3 months before the election. We have not yet won the debate on having a year-round organizing strategy. I do that with my campaign. When people contribute to my campaign, it goes into not only a fundraiser, which every campaign has, but it goes into an organizing director and other people on the organizing team who then work not only on my race, but on races across the country. The Democratic Party has not embraced the concept of organizing in a holistic way. And you will see the difference between members who really go to the streets, even in a time of COVID, perhaps not with all their volunteers, but they themselves go and knock on doors and really take that person-to-person contact very seriously, versus members who just rely on television ads, or members who focus on, whatever form of digital media is appropriate for their district, so that they are really doing that all year round. Or you think about Stacey Abrams and the network that she's built, the infrastructure she's built in Georgia. Years ago, when Stacey was running for governor, and I supported her very early on, one of the things I noticed is that she had campaign literature in almost every language then. The Republican Party advertises in Chinese, for example, long before the Democratic Party ever decides to do that. And I think those are just all lessons that, frankly, we still haven't learned in the party as a whole. And there are a lot of people who still rely on pollsters, on other ways of assessing the state of a race, instead of really diving into new ways of organizing and reaching people.
So interesting. I want to close with Georgia, but just so 20 years or so ago, I remember I've always been a believer in inside outside, but people didn't know what the Progressive Caucus was. And this was at the nation sometimes. And now it's, 40%, maybe more of the Democratic Caucus. And you are the head of it. Mark Pocan just stepped down. He's going to do a labor caucus and a defense caucus. But tell us a little bit about how you are seeing the priorities of the Progressive Caucus, the rules changes that may make it even more sort of voting as a, not a, you know, as a block in an effective way.
Yeah.
And it's inside outside thinking in the
Yeah.
CCC.
Well, first of all, Mark and I are still the co-chairs
Okay.
until we hold our
Okay.
elections on December 3rd, and I will be running for the sole chair. We did change it from two co-chairs to a single chair, so I'll be running for another term. But I think that when I came into Congress, I saw that Keith Ellison and Raul Grijalva had just started to really try to build up an infrastructure to support progressives
Yeah.
and make the Progressive Caucus not only kind of a social group, which they had been for quite some time, but an actual force. And, some of it was we were getting more members in. But I was kind of stunned at the lack of infrastructure that existed, not only inside, but also in coordinating policy and research think tanks and coordinating labor unions and things like that. And so we set to work, Mark and I, after Keith and Raul, to really build that infrastructure. We raised the dues, something progressives never.
Really?
We raised the dues because we wanted to have more staff. We had one staff person on the inside to service 100 members. It made no sense. So we raised the dues. We added a policy staff, a communications staff, an administrative person, all to try to help get information to our members in a timely way. We also, with you, I serve as on the board of the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, and we all went out and we raised a couple $1 million to establish a 501c3 that could really do some of that deep work with our movements to help respond and proactively suggest progressive ideas. And now what we've done is we've just passed a very comprehensive set of reforms, some that are quite simple around attendance and whip requirements, because if you don't have engagement of your members, it's very difficult to get anywhere. It's hard to know where people stand. It's hard to move quickly and be nimble. But we also did institute some other things that have to do with our values. So we updated our progressive promise, which is a statement of our values and what it means to be a progressive. We're updating right now the list of bills that sort of exemplify at a macro level what we stand for as a caucus. And we're asking that our members sign on to at least 70% of those bills, co-sponsor those bills, things like Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, et cetera. But also we have a requirement now that if the caucus is to take a position, that request for taking a position can come from any member of the caucus, but you do have to get a 2/3 majority in order for the caucus to take a position. But once we take a position as a caucus, we are asking our members to vote with us 2/3 of the time. So really trying to solidify both the ability for members to weigh in and say, look, I want to take a position on this upcoming piece of legislation. But then if we do take a caucus, a fairly steep threshold to get to, that we all have to vote as a block for that position.
That's terrific. I was going to say one thing about the CPCC is also the value of having think tanks, think action tanks, and the unifying. Bringing them together is sort of unheard of, but they have really provided real-time analysis, which is so important.
That's right. On the HEROES Act, the CARES Act, the HEROES Act, the CPCC provided the first analysis, which actually got used across the caucus, by the way, but also on proactive proposals in real time. So you mentioned the Paycheck Recovery Act, which I still believe, and the speaker actually just brought it up in a meeting to say we really need to consider Representative Jayapal's Paycheck Recovery Act. But that was put together. It was an idea that came from Europe and other countries in Asia, but the CPCC was able to convene those progressive think tanks to help really turn it into legislation with me and to get people like Joseph Stiglitz and Mark Zandi from Moody's on board with the proposal. So I think it's both reactive and proactive. It's been a huge benefit.
Let me close with 1.5 questions, and I'll turn it over to Aaron for our participants. We had a panel this morning with people John Nichols was part of it, and the editor of The Nation, Don Guttenplan. But how do you see, just briefly, the election? And what do you see moving forward? The Senate was a loss, though. Georgia, related to this, I'm interested in how you see Georgia. You spoke about the infrastructure Stacey Abrams has built, and I think that's so critical to use that and build that, and not everyone parachute in. But I'm interested in your sense of what the election means for progressives and Georgia on our
Yeah.
mind.
Well, there's a lot of people that seem to be saying that, oh, this is a terrible situation. We lost some seats in the House. And my thing is, let's just remind us of what the task was before the election. When I went to bed the night before the election, job number one was to get Donald Trump out of the White House and to save our democracy after so much pain and destruction of the last 4 years. We did that. Not only did we get Donald Trump out of the White House, but we actually elected Joe Biden with a majority of the Electoral College as well as the popular vote. That's something that hasn't happened in a while. And so I just think we have to really celebrate that. And a big part of the reason that those wins happened, both in swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where you had enormous numbers of new voters turn out, young people, folks of color in urban dense areas. And we'll have to wait to see all the numbers, but that's at least the initial takeaways. We have to understand those are people for whom we progressives had to translate a progressive platform of Joe Biden's that we helped shape and then convince people that it was actually worth voting.
Yes.
And they did come out and vote. Now, look at Arizona and Georgia. These are states that have taken massive investment of labor from immigrant rights groups, Black Voters Matter, the New Majority Projects in Georgia, a number of groups that frankly were not getting a lot of support from the Democratic Party, but were part of the progressive infrastructure where people didn't give up. I remember sleeping on a church basement in Arizona 10 years ago, protesting SB 1070 and beginning that organizing work, day-to-day, year-round organizing for several years in order to really transform Arizona and Georgia, led by people of color and of course, Black women, particularly in Georgia. So I see those as massive movements forward because we are reshaping how we think about the Democratic base. It isn't just what happened, but when people say we don't pay attention to our base, sometimes progressives say the Democratic Party doesn't pay attention to our base. I would actually argue that they aren't our base yet as a party because they haven't turned out to vote. They haven't been spoken to. They haven't been courted. They haven't been convinced that the Democratic Party is going to do something for them. We progressives are the ones that expand the Democratic Party base by bringing folks in. Now they're a part of our base, and we have to make sure that we deliver real results, bold structural changes that inspire people to believe in us as Democrats and in government as a whole, that government can step up and be the great equalizer of opportunity.
I think that is the rock up the cliff, but important, and what we as progressives to remind people that government can improve people's lives and be in their lives. I'm going to turn it over to the president of the nation, but I just want to say that you have been at the heart of building an infrastructure. And I think that is critical. It's not a sexy word, but unlike 2008 and 9, I don't think you'll see demobilization because we're witnessing the ascendancy of a kind of insurgent progressive infrastructure that has grown because of your organizing. I hope in 2006, the nation did a special issue with the Progressive Caucus. And I remember we had short pieces about Medicare for all, and a number of people looked at us like we were. And so it takes years of your work, outside movements, and it's, I think it's more hopeful, and I'm glad you framed it that way.
Well, I have to before I know Erin.
I know you're.
But just very quickly, just on that point, I always say being progressive just means you're the first to the best and most just idea. And then the movement works to bring other folks along. Yeah. Look at $15. I mean, when we became the first major city in the country to pass a $15 minimum wage, we were called crazy left-wing radicals, probably called socialists, who knows? But the reality is now Florida has passed a $15 minimum wage, even as the state of Florida went to Donald Trump. They passed it with a 2/3.
Just briefly, I mean, this happened in a number of states. where there were some interesting bills, minimum wage, which passed, while Florida went for Trump. These ideas are more popular in some cases than the messengers. So it's something to unpack, because I think these ideas are popular if connected to people's lives. It will. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and thank you so much for joining us. And I recommend this book to Erin. Now, how Pramila had time to do this book, I do not know, but thank you for giving
because
us
the new press never let me stop.
new press. So
Well,
thank you, and I know there are many questions.
we have a few questions, and some of them really about structure around the Progressive Caucus. So Alexis Sewell is wondering if any representative could get into the caucus. So can you talk about what the requirements for membership might be?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we included in these reforms. Is we just want to make sure this is an ideological caucus. It's not an ethnic caucus where you're admitted regardless of what your ideological perspectives are. It is an ideological caucus. And so that is why we have the requirements, for example, around the progressive promise. And clear language about what we stand for. We have the requirements around sponsoring 70% of a limited number of bills. We're still finalizing the list, but it'll be 15 to 18 bills in 3 different categories, including racial justice, which the Progressive Caucus has always cared about, but we highlighted it as a major priority for us this time around, which is new. And so that is one piece of it. And then, of course, the requirement to vote with the caucus. There is no other caucus that has that requirement. It's a big deal when we take a position to say that members would need to vote with us 2/3 of the time. And so it's not a purity test. We understand different districts are different. We wouldn't want Katie Porter to lose her seat because she can't vote with us on every single issue. But we do think that the vast majority of the time, we should be having a block that can vote together on critical issues of importance to progressives.
Thank you. Steve Neems asks if there's a corresponding Progressive Caucus in the Senate. If there is, do they work with the House? And if not, why not?
There isn't a Progressive Caucus in the Senate. Bernie Sanders actually started the Progressive Caucus in the House along with Maxine Waters and Pete DeFazio. But he is still a member of the Progressive Caucus. Yeah. And so he still belongs to the Progressive Caucus. One of our new members the other day, Teresa Ledger Fernandez, asked Bernie during an orientation why he doesn't organize a Progressive Caucus in the Senate. And he just kind of laughed and said it's a very different environment over there. But I will say that we work obviously very closely with Elizabeth Warren, with Jeff Merkley, with Ed Markey, a number of progressive members that have been leaders on issues that are important to us. So while they may not be official members of the Progressive Caucus, I hereby designate to them, with whatever power I have vested within me, the ability to say they are honorary members of the Progressive Caucus.
Wonderful. And a follow-up again to how all of this works, if you could talk about the relationship between the Progressive Caucus and the Speaker.
Well, as Speaker Pelosi would always tell you, she was a founding member of the Progressive Caucus, or an early member of the Progressive Caucus. And she claims that very proudly. And I would say that, she has been the most progressive speaker to run out of all of the others that have either attempted to run or threatened to run. And so I think that it is an interesting relationship because she controls a lot of levers of power. She is a vote counter. The way to convince Nancy Pelosi of anything is to be able to deliver the votes to either pass a piece of legislation or to stop a piece of legislation. And if you don't have that, then it doesn't matter how much she likes or dislikes you. It really is about that. And so I believe that she is very committed to trying to, this may be her last term. And I don't know that for a fact, but it may be her last term as speaker. And I think she wants to have a legacy that delivers real results. I do believe she sees the crises across the country. We don't agree on everything. Sometimes we get into fights. It is not pleasant to be in what I call jokingly Pelosi purgatory. But the reality is that, you know, I believe she gives a lot of respect to people for fighting for what they want. It's just that we're not always going to agree on those things. And she is heading up a very large and diverse caucus. And we obviously represent the progressive wing of that. So I think we take power seriously. She has a lot of it. And that means that if we want to build our power, we have to get more nimble. We have to get more coordinated and more cohesive in what we are demanding. And we've got to make sure we can deliver the votes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yezdiar is here, and I want to say, you know, hi out into the community. She's attended a lot of our chats, and I think one with you. And the question is, I'm concerned about how the Biden-Sanders progressive agenda will be promoted by the Biden administration because of his statements about vetoing Medicare for all if it reaches his desk, and saying in the first debate, I am not a socialist, I beat the socialist. As the co-chair and leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, how will the progressive agenda work under President Biden?
Well, look, I think that red baiting and the attacks on progressives are age-old tactics that are used, have been used for over a century, including on people like Teddy Roosevelt, basically to limit the range of political possibilities for legislation. So just to be clear on that, the way to preserve the status quo is to make sure that everyone thinks that something else isn't possible. And the way you make everyone think that something else isn't possible is you levy a tax that have actually nothing to do at all with the policy, and that have to do with evoking concepts of fear, to go back to how Katrina first introduced me, concepts of fear, whether it's around, you know, red baiting, whether it's around brown and black folks versus working people. Hello, you know, working people are white, black, and brown and indigenous. And so I think that that's what we have to remember. And we have to find a way to just be clear about what we are for and never allow somebody else to define us for what we are or are not. And so I think that that's the most important thing to me. And, you know, that's really what I'm focused on, is we've got to deliver real results. Donald Trump he is a symptom as much as he is a problem. He was elected because there are so many people suffering across the country, 100 million people without health care, you know, 40% of Americans, even before COVID hit, that didn't have $400 in their bank account. Now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the progressive movement needs to be the wind behind their sails to institute really broad structural progressive change. And I think that's possible. Look at how far we've already come with Joe Biden endorsing our College for All bill that Bernie Sanders and I put forward. That's phenomenal. Already saying that he's going to cancel some student debt, not as much as we want it all gone. But he's saying some of it. Already saying he's going to put forward a broad proposal for comprehensive immigration reform. That's my dog whining. I don't know if you can hear it. In case you're wondering what's happening in my home, my dog really wants to go out, I think. But it's all done. So immigration reform, that's a critical piece. And on healthcare, yes, we didn't get Medicare for all, but you know what? We got a commitment that a public option will be public and not privatized. We got a commitment to invest in 600,000 new long-term care jobs. We got a commitment to make sure that we untether employment from healthcare so that nobody is going to be without healthcare if they lose their job, as is the case now. We got a commitment for the most aggressive drug pricing ever. So are we going to stop pushing for Medicare for all? Well, I told then Vice President Joe Biden that we were never going to stop pushing for it. But I would work to, and I did as the co-chair of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force, to get some of those fundamental concepts of Medicare for all into the Biden platform.
Michael Dolber wonders, does the Progressive Caucus have real input for picks in Biden's cabinet?
Well, we certainly have been had a lot of outreach, and my former chief of staff actually is over on the transition side, and so we've had very close contact. We're submitting our own list of nominees for different positions. We've been in very close touch with a number of different members. I can't tell you how much of a difference that's going to make, because I do think that they're probably getting that from a lot of people, but we are certainly going to do everything we can to promote, really strong progressive voices, not only at the cabinet secretary level, but all the way down.
Cynthia Evans wonders, do progressives have a plan for listening to rural voters and including them in the political process? Many of them feel completely ignored and left out of the Democratic Party.
Yes, I think that's a really important point, and I think Reverend Barber talks about this in a really important way when he talks about white, black, and brown folks, including poor folks in Appalachia and rural Appalachia. First of all, I think that populist ideas are resonant in rural districts because there are a lot of folks who live in rural areas who desperately need a raise in the minimum wage, or desperately need rural broadband, or desperately need water, running water, which is an issue not only in rural areas, but also in urban Detroit. And so I think that we are going to really focus on these populist ideas and make it clear that Democrats are not just a party of urban elite areas, as is sometimes thought of, but that we really represent the people. Of course, key to that is making sure we get money out of politics and stopping lobbyists from controlling the agenda on either side of the aisle, but also bringing power back to democratic reforms back in the form of DC statehood, working with Puerto Rico, depending on their self-determined ideas of what moves forward, but the ability for people to weigh in across the country as well as in those rural areas.
You touched a bit on some progressive ideas that are getting traction in the Biden administration and in policymaking. Bethany Taboni is specifically asking about the Green New Deal and wonders if a federal jobs guarantee and MMT economics, modern monetary theory, are the way to make the Green New Deal work, and if you have any ideas of how that might work in this administration.
Yeah, well, let me pull that apart a bit. We just had Stephanie Kelton, who wrote that wonderful book on MMT, come in and speak to the caucus, because we are trying to explode the debt and deficit myths that exist even within some of our own progressive caucus members, but in the Democratic Party writ large. We are also trying to explode the idea of paying for things. It's part and parcel of that, but I was talking to Katrina about how the Congressional Budget Office scores bills. Well, they have a terrible way of scoring bills, number one, but on top of that, they don't score based on things like, is this bill going to reduce income inequality and wealth inequality? Is this bill going to reduce racial, economic and racial injustices, those kinds of things. And so we're really trying to look at a new way of thinking about what legislation benefits the country. And so MMT and other ideas are part and parcel of that. As it relates to the Green New Deal, I think that it is incredibly popular across the country, but there are fears around what it means for union jobs in particular, that is being used by fossil fuel lobbyists and others to advocate for the status quo. And so I think what we need to do is understand that Joe Biden actually did propose a the most progressive policy on climate in recent presidential history. It's still too slow for the urgency of what's happening. But let's take what we negotiated as the floor and continue to work for more, understanding that at the core, we need to get our labor brothers and sisters and siblings on board. We need to think about some of the tricky parts of moving from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable energy economy, how you get jobs in the same places, how you really train people who know how to work with their hands. They're not just going to be trained on some technological job of the quote future, and so those are some of the things we're going to have to do. But I feel very positive about how far we've already come thanks to the Sunrise Movement and so many young people across the country that are just putting climate justice, not just a response to climate change, but climate justice on the table in really important ways.
In an earlier panel today, we had a really passionate and important conversation about the division in this country and who to focus on and if it's possible to change people's minds. And that's come up a few times now in the chat. And Ian Jelinek is specifically asking, how are we going to bring Trumpies along? Asking how important the Green New Deal is for employing people and making them feel productive and rebuilding this nation. But at the core, and it's on a lot of people's minds, what are we doing with these 70+ million people who voted for Trump?
Well, we have to start by trying to talk to people. We have to start by passing policies that actually make them believe that we're going to do anything for them. Why would we expect that people think that their lives are going to get better when for the past several decades, their lives have been getting worse? And so that's the work that we have to do. And it's tandem, right? It's delivering on results and it's talking to people. In my book, I have a little piece about, I run in a district that is largely Democratic, but it's a top 2 district. So often you have 2 Democrats running against each other. And in my first campaign, that's what I had all the way through the general election. So it's not a D on R race by the time it gets to the general. And so I decided in the general that since there were 2 Democrats on the ticket, that Republicans would have to vote for someone. Why couldn't it be me? So I went out to talk to about the 20% or so, 22% at that time that were Republicans and focused on those that seemed like they would be the most moderate. And I have a story about going out on a sunny day and I knew the person was a Republican and they were cleaning their It was a kind of a big burly guy, Caucasian guy, cleaning his Harley, right? And I had some stereotypes about that, I admit. That really got completely busted in that interaction. I started to talk to him about all the things, I thought were important, starting with economic issues. And we had so much agreement, increasing workplace democracy, strengthening unions, $15 minimum wage. He was with me on everything. And then he says to me, well, what do you think about guns? What's your position on guns? And I thought, uh-oh. And I said, well, I really believe that, I said, to be totally honest, I'm scared of them. I said, but I really believe that we need sensible gun rules and regulations, just like for cars or driver's licenses or anything else. I said, I am married to a guy who used to be a hunter, which was true, and had guns in the house, which was true. Didn't say that he's now a vegetarian and a Buddhist, but anyway. And he said, so we had a conversation for a couple of minutes, and then I realized we were not going to agree. He said, oh God, you're one of those Democrats that wants to take my guns away. And, I realized we were not going to agree on this topic. And so it was time to move on. I said, you know what, I know we don't agree on this, but I'd love to get your vote. And he said, well, I was going to vote for you, but now because of this guns issue, I just can't. I just don't agree with you. And I said, yeah, I get it. His wife was standing there. I said, how long have you been married? And he said, 23 years. I said, wow, that's amazing. And do you and your wife agree on 100% of issues? And he did just what Katrina did. He laughed. He laughed. Ha, ha, ha. Of course we don't. And I said, with my sweetest smile, I said, well, you married her. I'm just asking for your vote. Yeah. And he immediately broke into laughter. First was, sort of shocked at what I said, then started laughing, stuck out his hand and said, you know what? Thank you for being honest. That is such a rare quality. And I'm going to vote for you. But if you try to take my guns away, I'm going to be on your ASS. And so there you go. I just think there is a lot more in common than what divides us, but we have to help people to be in the mentality of a we first society, not a me first society. Mm-hmm. And if you want to do that, then you got to make sure some of those basic economic needs are met so that they don't start to turn on somebody that is just a fall guy for the real problem.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know you have a hard out in a few minutes because you are doing the work of the nation, not this nation now, but
Nation.
yeah. And so I just want to leave you with one more question. When we met over the summer, the mood was very different and the conversation was very different. And I asked you then what you saw as hopeful, and you gave a very hopeful answer. And I wonder how that's changed and where do you see the hope and possibility now?
Well, I'm 100 times more hopeful than I was 6 months ago because I don't have to deal with the man with the orange hair in the White House that made our lives absolutely miserable and literally had us on a path to what I believe would be fascism. I mean, I just think that the constitutional destruction that he was undertaking was of a scale that you can't even imagine. So I am so hopeful because we have a Democratic president or president-elect. We have the first Black person and the first South Asian American as vice president-elect. And we have a progressive platform that was shaped by our hands, by our engagement, despite our cynicism, despite everything that we fear might happen. I believe that we showed in this election what we can do when we come out and we actually try to use our votes and our voices to influence the process. That is the only way that democracy works, the only way. And that makes me so hopeful to see all the young people, all the folks of color, the incredible work that not only Stacey Abrams, but LaTosha Brown and so many others did in Georgia, all the work that people did in Arizona, not with the help of some outside party, but just with their own hands, their own organizing on the ground. What else could give us more hope than that?
Pramila, I want to thank you. I've been reading the Serenity Prayer every morning, but I'm going to start watching this video to get me into the day. No, I think we all value your leadership, but there's a grounded pragmatism allied with visionary, grounded hope that I think is so inspiring. And that you're in the place you're in is due to your hard work, your movement organizing, your theory of change. But I find it extraordinarily exciting. And I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to talk to us about what progressivism means, the ideas, and understanding that it takes years to move what seemed impossible to achievable, but it's always it's always the struggle and the work and the discipline. And what you're doing with the caucus requires discipline to move. And last thing I would say, we began the morning with the Prime Minister of Iceland, Katrín Jakobsdóttir. And I think you would find a lot in common in terms of, quote, compromise. She's in a parliamentary system. And what you're describing with the CPC in a way is making it a parliamentary bloc and the power of that in our system. So thank you for being here. And may your other Medicare for All and the other Zooms you will go to, it's a big kind of nation in the nation day, all these issues. But
well, thank you so much.
And I hope your good dog gets.
Yes, I texted my husband and said, please come get the dog because everyone's wondering what these strange noises are coming from my video.
I was a little worried, but I didn't.
Before you go, I should tell you your dog gets a shout out in the chat. Shirley McGreal points out that you have a dog and Biden has 2 dogs and Trump did not have any.
Yeah,
That's right. And just for, the love of dog lovers, Otis is 80 pounds, Labradoodle, just the sweetest guy you ever could imagine. And I'm going to send him all the love and hope that he forgives me for not getting up to let him out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I just want to thank everybody in our community for being here. I hope you guys have had an extraordinary day. And now I just want to bring Sarah Burke, our associate publisher, out.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for day 1 of the festival. I know everyone needs their rest before you come back for day 2. But if you have a little bit more energy left, we hope that you will head over to the sessions area of the platform where we will have some networking rooms open so that you can go in and mingle with your other festival attendees and get to know each other a little bit. But please make sure you come back tomorrow feeling well rested, because it will be even a busier day than today, if you can believe it. So we'll be back tomorrow morning at 9:30 Eastern. I apologize in advance for all of our West Coast friends. I know it's early, but I promise it'll be worth it. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow.